Hi, I'm Dr. Versalati, and in this series we're talking about creating rubrics for assessing language performance. And these slides are from a presentation that I did with Don McCormick at the Pre-Conference Institute at TESOL 2019. In this particular screencast, we're going to talk about a post-use review of our rubrics. Reminder that we're focusing on performance-based assessment and we're evaluating the quality of our students' performances. Analytic rubrics focus on multiple traits, and each trait can have a different rating or score. And remember that the categories come directly from the learning objectives, and the levels of the descriptors of quality are create the levels of student performance, and these are context specific. The rubric descriptors are going to focus on what the learner can do, and the descriptors can also include the effect on the audience, like can be understood by a teacher experienced in working with learners of English. We want to make sure that there's beneficial consequences to using the rubric, like positive washback and individual feedback, and using the results to inform subsequent lessons. In addition to the pre-use review strategies, we also want to think about post-use review. And this is a critical part of the assessment process. It not only helps us improve the assessment itself, did the assessment do the job we expected it to do, but we also want to improve the rubric, the tool that we use to assess the student performance. One way is just to ask ourselves, was this rubric easy to use? Were you consistent when you were rating? Of course, these are that's a hard one to answer because we always want to be fair, but think about how you experienced that. Did you find yourself wobbling or not sure or going back and forth? And did the learners benefit from the assessment? Obviously, easy to use is a matter of practicality. Consistent is a matter of the reliability of the tool, the assessment tool, and did the learners benefit from the assessment is the beneficial consequences. So let's look specifically at some of the things we can do after we have used the rubric. You can ask yourself, did you use all the levels of performance? Did anybody get the top score in the categories? It's not expected that the same student gets the top score for every category or trait in the rubric, but was it possible that somebody in the classroom did? The levels of performance should be relevant for these learners. Remember, we said rubric should be context specific. I know that in some classrooms, the same rubric has to be used all year, and it's expected that the students do not meet the expectations, and then they move, as they learn, maybe their performances improve, and then they do start to meet or exceed the expectations. I'm wondering if that's less relevant for a classroom assessment. I understand there's a value of that for programmatic assessment, or diagnostic or proficiency testing. But in a classroom, I'm not sure how that works if all the students are below expectations for the first half of the year. That can be difficult. So think about if you used all the levels of performance. If the level of performance at the lowest level isn't used, maybe you can just reduce that level of performance. Maybe your students are more advanced. So think about that. Were the results meaningful? in that would the decisions you use, the decisions based on the results, would they be valid? So did the levels really differentiate relevant quality differences between the learners? Or did you find that most learners were in the B category, even though there were differences of performance in between there? In that case, you might have to split that descriptor into two different levels to better, so that everyone's not just falling into the B level. Maybe you want to make that more clear that there's a B plus, a B, and a B minus, or a higher B or a lower B, or whatever the situation might be. And if one of the levels never, ever, ever describes your students, maybe it doesn't belong in this rubric. It's a matter of practicality of having a very busy rubric. Studies have shown that students don't really read all the cells in the rubric, so maybe if it's not relevant for your learners, you might want to delete it. An opposite position is also possible. There might be a reason why you keep that there. For instance, student affect. Maybe the students can at least say, well, I wasn't at the lowest level. Maybe that's a reason why you keep it. Moving on to some more complex post-use review. It's important to check your rubric for confounded categories. So let's pretend we're just looking at these two categories within a rubric. These two categories are part of a larger rubric, because I wouldn't have a rubric with only two categories. Maybe I would, but let's just pretend that we're just focusing on these two. And maybe we found out that all the times, for every single student, if they scored the top score in vocabulary, they also were assigned the top score in collocation use. Every time. If they got, these were always paired together on every single, the same level of performance was assigned for both of these categories. It might be that those categories are confounded. So for instance, like in the same vein, if they scored the lowest, every time somebody scored the lowest in vocabulary, they also scored the lowest in collocation. Though if that's the case for both of those, every single paper, top got top in both of them, low got low in both of them, they might be confounded categories. So what do we do with that? If you decide, and you have to think about it, if you decide that they are confounded categories, maybe those categories should be combined. For instance, vocabulary and collocation use, where you have both of them. In this way, the students that are strong in this category will be strong, but they won't kind of like double count. You won't be double counting that vocabulary skill. So there are some ideas for how to review rubrics after you use them. And in a following screencast, I'm going to talk about how to assign scores if you want to use rubrics for grading.